Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. In today's committee close-up, we're joined by State Senator Norm Needleman, Democratic co-chair of the Energy and Technology Committee, and ranking Republican State Senator Ryan Fazio. Ryan, Norm, thank you both so much for being here.
Great to see you.
So the Energy and Technology Committee, there's a lot going on. It's a very exciting committee in this short session. So we have a lot to get into today. But before we talk about some of the policy that we're seeing this session, we'll start with Ryan and then we'll go to Norm. What are some of the biggest challenges you've been hearing from residents that they're facing right now?
Well, first and foremost, that they pay the third highest electricity costs in the continental U.S., and they're not always getting the best service from the utility companies that they expect or deserve. So top priority of the entire state government, to say nothing of our energy committee, is to make sure we're limiting costs and that we're protecting consumers. So we passed bipartisan legislation last year that empowers PURA, the primary regulator of our utilities, to protect consumers with new tools, better oversight. And at the same time, we need policies at the state level that limit cost increases, that eventually might even be able to decrease costs paid by consumers in the state. Every year I introduce legislation with some of my colleagues that I think could limit costs going forward. But those are some of the top priorities we hear from residents every single day.
Yeah. And I assume it's the same for you, Norm, or what are you hearing from constituents?
Obviously, we always hear about cost being an issue for residents and businesses, and it's a deep concern of mine, and I know of much of the committee. But we also hear a lot about climate change mitigation and the need to do what is a reasonable amount of work to get to a zero carbon electric grid. Sometimes that adds cost, and we try to mediate that impact. That said, it's a complicated problem. You see that there are issues popping up all over the country with regard to resources to generate power. And how do we plan for our future and at the same time not impact reliability and cost?
So we're going to get into more of those energy proposals, but really quickly, your committee also includes technology. So talking about tech, it's really rapidly changing. We're constantly learning new things, new developments, and also threats. Governor Ned Lamont kind of mentioned this right at the start of the session in his State of the State address, saying more smartphones make you stupid and hinting at policies for cell phones in schools. So tell me about some of the proposals your committee is looking at when it comes to our devices.
Well, actually, in my first year in office in 2022, the first law I passed was to implement pilot programs regarding smartphones in schools. And so starting this year, several middle school districts will actually be taking cell phones out of those middle schools in order to see what positive benefits that could result in for students' academic achievement, but especially their mental health. So technology brings so many benefits, and we're not going to totally detach people from technology. But for adolescents, for kids who are developing socially and mentally and emotionally, ensuring that they actually have socialization, ensuring that they actually can do well in school, and we reduce the influence of negative technologies when they're most impressionable, I think is very important. And some of the bills I proposed this year, some of the bills that have come through general law with Senator Maroney, and some of the initiatives that the governor is taking this year, all hopefully can accrue to the benefit, especially of our youngest residents.
And we've seen all committees, Norm, talking about AI, artificial intelligence, but your committee has kind of been tasked with creating some of the ground rules and understanding how we can balance, as you said, embracing technology while still regulating it. Where does Connecticut stand right now in regards to AI?
Well, I actually think that the legislature might benefit from having their devices left behind also at times, to be quite honest with you. It's not only impressionable young minds, but we are very dependent on our technology, and it's a critical part of our lives. From our point of view on the Energy Committee, it's a lot of technology related to energy policy, and we approved tax incentives for data centers in Connecticut, and now we have some proposals on the table that may consume large amounts of energy, and one of the largest issues facing the country is the amount of energy that's being consumed from computing power and data. And we're very concerned about the impact on the grid. I think today the head of FERC actually spoke about it. It's an uncontrolled thing. We all become very dependent on our technology, and we need it more and more. I think, as Senator Fazio said, it's a double-edged sword. It brings with it great opportunity, but it also brings with it some really potential damaging things.
So let's get into energy now. Obviously, one of the main parts of your committee as well, and a huge topic here. As you mentioned, Ryan, Connecticut has some of the highest utility costs here in the country. But when we look at energy infrastructure in our state, do you see higher prices on people's bills coming mainly from the company's business models, or more from the root cause and the region and the cost of supply here in Connecticut?
I think the answer is yes.
To both.
It's all of the above. And so when utility companies go for recovery from our regulator, we need to have a regulator who's tough, who's defending our consumers, who ensures that any sort of recovery that utility companies get from ratepayers is justifiable legally, is just and prudent. And so we passed legislation last year that I think will give more of the right tools to our regulators for that reason. They're regulated monopolies. It's not a free market. And I'm a free market guy, but consumers deserve protection. At the same time, any regulator needs to be reasonable so that there can be investment, especially as we see more electrification, more demand on the grid. But there's also a lot of other drivers of cost. And I think a lot of state government policies have increased the cost of generation, have put costs of government programs on the backs of ratepayers. And so I think there's also ways that we should explore as a legislature, as policymakers, reducing those costs on consumers, which to some extent are discretionary, are choices being made by policymakers.
And I want to say that many of those choices were done in a broadly bipartisan way. Things like making sure that Millstone stayed in business was a broad bipartisan bill, adds a great amount of cost to ratepayers because we've decided as a state that it's a critical asset to have in the state. That said, when you look at your bill now, there is a much more transparent bill. It shows you what that cost is. And I would argue if all of that came out of a bill, off of your bill, you would still see pretty high costs. I think most of what drives costs here is one, deregulation, which we did in the late 90s. I think it will go down as one of the most legendary bad decisions we ever made. And I think that geography, plain and simple, has a huge impact.
Well, and Norm, you mentioned hearing from constituents about climate change, and there's been a push for more green, more sustainable energy, and utility companies here have to sell a minimum amount of renewable energy. But there is a price tag with that before you see savings. It's an investment. So whether it's EverSource increasing costs to get into offshore wind farms, or legislature spending more on sustainable energy infrastructure, people do want to see relief now. How does the state balance investing in sustainable practices while also keeping costs low for everyone?
I would say that in my years of solving problems, I'm a mathematician by trade, the most complicated issue I've ever faced. And we spend all day long trying to figure out exactly that. So to give you a soundbite answer would be almost impossible. That said, what we did with Senate Bill 7 and before that, Take Back Our Grid, go a long way to at least ensuring that on the utility side of the ledger, we're holding them accountable. On the procurement side, we've rejected increased costs from some energy procurements because they got to be too expensive. We're looking at that now. We do have another major sort of train heading our way, which is a lot of old power plants are coming off the grid. And we're going to need more energy one way or another. I think some of that is going to be more expensive, wind and solar. hopefully we find other things and other ways to get more energy here that doesn't impact the environment in a negative way.
And Ryan, you mentioned electrification. I think electric vehicles have been a big conversation, sometimes controversial at the legislature over the past couple months, and it's raised questions about grid capacity. Can Connecticut support possibly, introducing more electric vehicles in the near or more distant future? So tell me a little bit about that. Where does that stand right now in the committee?
Listen, I want to see an increased electrification of our vehicle fleet. I think there's positives from electric vehicles, but mandating one size fits all for the state, saying that we're going to ban sale of new electric vehicles, that's something that I think every Republican is against and many Democrats are against in the state legislature, which is why it didn't advance. That would require so much new electricity generation in Connecticut that we'd have to add one large offshore wind farm per year, basis my calculations. And we're struggling so much with the one new wind farm that we're trying to add over the course of 10 years. The new offshore wind deployments, the most recent contracts out of New York seem like they're about $160 per megawatt. By contrast, the competitive marketplace is about $30. The Millstone contract is $50. So we have to be very careful that the new direct procurements that the state supports, that ratepayers are paying for, in contrast to the competitive market, doesn't increase long-term costs for ratepayers, for regular middle-class people and retirees too much. I think orders of magnitude of 2-3 times higher than the competitive marketplace for directly contracting for new electricity, including offshore wind, is not a reasonable ask of consumers. So we, at the same time, we want to see more electrification. We need to balance all those costs and benefits in a prudent way and not go off the rails at any point. And
that balance is really something that's, bipartisan agreement there.
Well, I just want to say a couple of things.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between electrifying your personal automobile, right, and electrifying the tractor-trailer fleet out there. Mm-hmm. They're different orders of magnitude. Mm-hmm. Most people drive 30 to 35 miles a day on average. They will be charging their vehicle in their house. I actually believe that there'll be a robust market for charging stations that are at the place of gas stations now, where they're going to convert their capacity. Pura has done a phenomenal job developing a roadmap to electrification. Although I'm not for a mandate or banning anything necessarily, I am for sending market signals. Mm-hmm. That said, I think the auto manufacturers really kind of messed up. Mm-hmm. I think that they all tried to become Tesla, and Tesla's market has seemingly capped out now. I think hybrids are going to be a big part of our future, where you go 60 miles or 50 miles on your electric vehicle and you plug it in. It's relatively quick to charge it, be it at your house or somewhere in a more public space. I think when you get to tractor trailers and bus fleets, that's where some of the money is going to come. And I think that I prefer to see the cost of the upgrades to the grid borne on the backs of the commercial enterprises that are going to be selling you electricity to charge your vehicle. Mm-hmm. Nobody has a gas pump in their house. Well, I actually know one person that does, but no one has a gas pump in their house. They go to a commercial establishment and pump gas into their car. Yeah. They're lucky somebody else pumps it. Not
well,
much anymore.
For me, I'm originally from New Jersey, so I had to learn how to pump gas
right.
when I moved here. Well, definitely so much happening in the Energy and Technology Committee. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I know we could keep going about all the other bills, but we'll continue to cover what moves out of your committee and onto the floors this session. Thank you both so much again for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Great, thank you.
That does it for us here on The Real Story, but if you want to watch these segments again, you can head to fox61.com or download the free Fox 61 News app and watch us every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61 or streaming on Fox 61 Plus. Have a great morning.